So, we're joined in the studio by a barrister and former military officer, Frank Ledwidge, who served in the Balkans, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan. Very good morning to you. You've also worked for the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and you were the first justice advisor to the UK mission in Helmand province. I mean, that's utterly remarkable. You know, you've served. There's a civilian MP who shows her weapons because she knows that she could be targeted by Russian forces.
Yes, and it's an indication of what the Russians have coming to them when they try to, and I say try to, enter and take the city of Kiev. This will be a very, very different fight from anything that they've had before, save possibly for Chechnya, which was a savage and brutal.
They were brutal and ruthless in Chechnya. Yeah. What is going to happen to Kiev, do you think?
Well, in Chechnya, the strategy was laid out by a guy called General Grachev, and he said, how do we take a city? We take a city by using every weapon in the army's arsenal. And that's exactly what they will do. They will hammer the defences until they have terrorised the population, sorry to say, but killed and injured many of the defenders, and they will continue doing so until submission or, on their part, defeat.
But we saw from the last war that Stalingrad was reduced to rubble. There was barely a building left standing in an enormous city. But the fighting spirit of the Russians wasn't crushed. They fought in the rubble and they prevailed.
Right.
Do you predict, based just that extraordinary interview there, based on the fighting spirit of the Ukrainian people, that that's what will happen here?
I think they're opening a bleeding ulcer there. I think we're looking at something like Stalingrad or possibly Warsaw, which never surrendered. Warsaw ended the war 3 or 4 meters high, but it ended it essentially in pride, if not victory. Now, I'm not predicting anything like that for Kiev, but what we can see there from Yasia and, of course, the other Ukrainian defenders is a spirit that isn't going to be easily defeated.
We all pay tribute to their spirit. I think a lot of people wonder, the might of the Russian army is enormous. Why they haven't so far taken more territory? Is that because Putin is holding something back, or is that because they don't have the resources that we think they do?
Well, Mike Tyson said that everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the face. It's very clear that the Russian plan wasn't very good, and the counter-punch was rather more formidable than they expected. And it's also very clear that the first principle of military planning, which is that planning and preparation prevents poor performance, wasn't followed. And we see the results of that, as Bryce said earlier, in that huge convoy that seems to be jammed up on the highway heading towards Belarus, elements of the 39th Combined Arms Army. And what we're seeing there is real evidence of a lack of planning, running out of fuel, serious logistics problems. And it's worth remembering that American Marine General put it a few years ago. He said that amateurs talk strategy and tactics, professionals talk logistics. And what the Russians have is a very severe logistical problem, not only in that convoy, but throughout the country.
Air cover is clearly crucial in any war of this kind, and we heard yesterday that Washington is working very hard to persuade the Poles to give Russian-built fighter jets and fighter bombers and ground attack aircraft to Ukraine because they'll know how to fly them. They're familiar with those cockpits. If that happens, what do you think is the risk of Putin saying, that is a step too far, that is engaging with me, I take that as an act of war from the West?
Well, only Putin knows the answer to that question. But what I will say is this. If the Russian military had done their job properly, in a way that we would have done, we wouldn't be talking about a Ukrainian Air Force now. Had NATO been conducting this operation, or any competent Western force, the first thing that they would have done is take out the Ukrainian air defences, the Ukrainian Air Force. Not a soldier, not a regular soldier anyway, would have crossed that border until we'd be absolutely sure of what we call in our world, control of the air. And they failed to do that. And it's quite astonishing that the Ukrainian Air Force is still a force in being. I mean, we celebrate every September the Battle of Britain. This is the Battle of Ukraine. And air power scholars will be looking at this years ahead as to how the Ukrainians managed to keep that force in being. And now we're looking at a reinforcement. Is it an escalation? Well, in principle, actually, Richard, it's not. Because we've been sending deadly guided missiles, 17,000 so far from the West. A huge arsenal, which is cutting chunks out of Russian armour, as the Chief of Defence Staff indicated yesterday. Aircraft are simply a step forward.
Yes. Thank you very much.